Thanks, John. Thanks, Joey. Wonderful to have you all back here this morning. We had a great evening last night. I don't know how many of you were able to be with us, but we had a wonderful set of Ignite talks of people talking about not their job, talking about things outside of their ordinary existence. Today we're actually going to get towards our jobs, or in the case of some of our speakers, our multiple jobs going on. But I wanted to start by telling you a little bit about how we're doing this conference a little differently than in times past. First, can I just get a quick show of hands? Who's been to a night civic media conference before? Okay, about half the room. For whom is this the first time? Show of hands, first-timers. Welcome, first-timers. We are happy to have you here. It's great to have this about 50-50. So we've been doing this conference at MIT as long as there has been a Center for Civic Media, which is about 6 years now. This is the third conference that I've helped put together with a remarkable team that includes John Bracken, Laurie Lejeune, it includes Sasha Costanza-Chalk. We've got an amazing help from friends at MIT and at night, particularly Megan Zimroth, Chris Sofer. We have tried the last 3 years to do these conferences around a specific theme. So not just bringing together people who are working in this new field of civic media, this sort of intersection between civic engagement and participatory media, but we've also tried to pull out a thread that sort of unites the programs that we have on the table. So 2 years ago, we were really going after this question of what is civic media? What is this idea that we put forward, that we're trying to both study as an academic discipline, but also take on as practitioners? Last year, we took on this question of storytelling. We had a conference called The Story and the Algorithm. This year, we're going in a very different direction. We're putting forward the theme of insiders and outsiders. And really, our logic behind insiders and outsiders was that we know that pretty much everyone who's going to get on stage, and I think probably everyone in the audience, is someone who firmly believes this idea that if you have a long enough lever and a good place to stand, you can move the world. And this is really a question of where should you stand? Are you more powerful in trying to make change by standing outside of institutions that you are troubled by, that you have questions about, that you want to see reform to? Are you better as an outside agitator, or are you better in finding your way within some of these very powerful systems and looking for change within? And so what we've done is we've brought together a pretty remarkable range of speakers to be up here on stage and sort of address this. And I just want to say something about the structure of how we're doing this conference. We decided that we were banning panels. Panels are one of my least favorite things about conferences. We wanted to give great speakers, thank you, I'm there as well. So we wanted to give speakers a chance to stand up and really express themselves, take a little bit of time on stage. So for each one of these sessions we're organizing, we have a curator. I'm your curator for this session, but you're going to see different curators up on stage, moderating and emceeing. You're going to see a series of speakers, sometimes speakers in videos, other sorts of interventions. Usually at the end, we're going to end up having a conversation. So in this not panel session, we're going to have 3 speakers coming up on stage. Each are going to have a chance to talk. I'm going to ask each one a question. We're going to bring the 4 of us back on for a Q&A at the end of all of this. But I'm really excited about this opening session because we have 3 truly remarkable individuals who in their own ways are deeply insiders and deeply outsiders. We have, speaking last on the panel, we have the executive director of the Wikimedia Foundation, an outsider project that has now gone on to be probably, the leading encyclopedia in the world by many standards and one of the very largest websites in the world. We have a remarkable, as she describes it, poetician in Birgitta Jonsdottir, who has been working as an activist inside and outside the Icelandic parliament. And we're leading off with a fascinating figure in U.S. politics, Congressman Darrell Issa, who is actually here speaking ex officio in his role as the co-founder of the OpenGov Foundation. Congressman Issa has been representing his district in California since 2001. He's a successful businessman and entrepreneur. He's a former Army veteran. And he's done a remarkable job of building alliances across the aisle on some issues and also being deeply engaged on the right side of the aisle on other issues. We're really thrilled that he can be here. We're excited to hear about the work that he's doing with Open Government Foundation. Congressman Issa. Great to have you.
Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you see this mic? Because I'm going, wow, this is really cool. It is a delight to be here, and it's a delight to be here not to make a speech per se, but to sort of run you through a little bit of how I got to be in this group. And I'm just young enough that when I talk about the 60s and sticking it to the man, I'm talking as somebody who heard about it. But I'm old enough to sort of see that generation where we thought we were making a change in the 70s and 80s, where we were dealing with the lies that were told surrounding the war in Vietnam, the genuine threat we had from communism, while at the same time there was tremendous manipulation of the media and false statements made. And of course, just enough of a historian to remember Eisenhower's farewell address where he said, "Beware the military-industrial complex." And that's a big part of the reason that I want to see open government, and the Open Gov Foundation is a piece of it. But I'm delighted to be here because we need a lot more than just that. Making sure that never again will you have a bill like SOPA and PIPA over in the Senate where they say it does one thing, and clearly it doesn't do that. It does just the opposite in many, many cases. And yet there's this misinformation, and there's an inability, if you will, to coalesce behind getting the truth out. Now, that SOPA is a great one to talk about in a group like this, but the fact is, every piece of legislation longer than about 2 pages, which is every piece of legislation that goes through the Congress, is filled with what-ifs that are not well defined, and that the white paper produced by the author is genuinely one-sided. So what we tried to do post-SOPA or during SOPA and then after was to create a environment to keep the web open, and obviously Open Gov Foundation is dedicated to take that nationally down to the city level, and of course up eventually, we hope, to the international level. But what we do, and thanks to the Knight Foundation, we're not doing it just with Issa Foundation money, is we're making sure that in the future legislation will be put online and then will be visible for every single edit and proposed edit that the author is going to see, including their own. So that my hope is that you never again see a bill dropped, which is confusing enough, and then on the day that it's being marked up, the chairman walks in with a completely new bill they call a manager's amendment. None of it have you seen before, and of course it runs through, and that even happens on the House floor. One of the things that I should bring you a little bit up on is, as we did the Madison Project federally, we became interested, and thanks to the Knight Foundation, specifically targeted the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore to say, what are the needs at a more local level? One of the discoveries was there are greater needs at the local level. And I might note that it's not because the state of Maryland or the city of Baltimore hadn't spent a lot of money on what I call propaganda sites, websites that told you how great they were, told you about all the great services, told you about park system hours, but of course didn't tell you who was voting for or against a piece of legislation, where people stood, or even accurately the progress of legislation. I specifically speak to Maryland, where if you want to find out, and this is one that Seamus Kraft, who's here with me today from the foundation, points out, is if you want to find out the #1 issue in Maryland legislature, which is gun control legislation, and you type gun, you will find absolutely nothing. Because you have to know to type firearms to begin with. And then when you want to see the votes, you actually have to call their staffs because there's no central way to see that. And that's not by accident. That's by the inherent way that government doesn't make itself open, except when it wants to tell you something. The people that get together in Congress that care about open government, and you'll see that on the rest of this non-panel, we're not politically aligned. The conclusions, yeah, okay, it's not that funny. The conclusions that we will reach on where government should go will be different in many cases. But the idea that there should be an open and transparent process because I don't trust that which is not seen is the same whether you're the Sunlight Foundation or you're Jared Polis, who wants to legalize marijuana nationally, but at the same time doesn't trust a government that keeps everything behind closed doors. Or Ron Wyden, Senator Wyden, who I work with he was one of the early opposers to PIPA. I'm delighted to be here for another reason right now. We have something that I think is topical that I'd like to bring up today. And I bring this up from a foundation standpoint, but I also bring it up as a citizen. Everyone's talking about, where the flight and which seat's going to be filled and whether it's going to Ecuador or Cuba. Nobody's really focused on, did we have a process where laws passed by our representatives are being checked and rechecked broadly to see whether or not the Patriot Act is being stretched, whether or not FISA judges are in fact responsible to the law, or whether they tend to get co-opted with, well, my job is to make sure that I always say yes so we can get the bad guys. There's no question at all that laws were broken. My question is, what about the laws we passed versus what did this administration do, including perhaps people that were cooperating that we thought were overseeing the process, whether it's FISA judges or members of Congress. You can't make everything in government open, but you can make the process for review open. And I think that coming off of the latest Snowden situation, I think what we're going to do is we're going to be asking how many eyes on both sides are going to be able to see what's going on with the NSA. And I'll bring up a particular point. Earlier this year, I never criticize the outcome of legislation because it's the will of the people as best you can get it. But earlier this year, the president signed new whistleblower legislation. And there was hoopla and, ribbon cutting kind of things. I have a picture with President Obama, and we're all smiling. But he signed a series of letters that essentially said, I won't do, I won't do, I won't do, in the case of the whistleblower bill. And even more importantly, classified information such as what NSA was doing to and for us is not part of a broad whistleblower bill. You cannot come to an individual member of Congress with that information. There's a very limited group that you can come to, which begs the whole question is, if you can only go to Mike Rogers at the Select Intelligence Committee or Dianne Feinstein at the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they've already decided that everything that's going on at the NSA is fine, and you can't bring it to a member of Congress who is bound by oath to keep it a secret, but at the same time has the ability to take it forward and hopefully find out whether they're living up to their constitutional responsibility as we're all supposed to. No, you can't do that. So there's a lot of legislation that I think the transparency community can demand as a result of this. Will we have better oversight to where you can count on every member of Congress, if asked, to find out whether or not our laws are being stretched? And I think in light of, and I know we've got folks who are going to talk about WikiLeaks, look, I don't want to have our secrets leaked to the press. I don't want to have our secrets leaked to the public. But if we don't give every citizen and every concerned individual around the world places to go with confidence that they're speaking to a sympathetic ear that is actually going to advocate for the truth on their behalf, then I believe we won't have that. So in addition to the work that OpenGov is trying to do to make laws transparent and all of the other organizations that Knight Foundation is backing to bring sunlight to the process, we also have to bring, at least in our republic, we have to bring to it an exception that every single member of Congress, from the far left to the far right, from people who are very much for something to people that are very much against something, have to be able to hear from whistleblowers. If we don't make those changes, then I think we have to accept that we will continue to have people feel that the press and public disclosure is the only way to get a fair hearing. In closing, I'm a television and movie fan, and I remember 3 Days of the Condor as a movie, and if you haven't seen it, please see it. It's very cheap. It's been around forever. You can TiVo it. But it really is about whether there's a state within a state. And I will tell you, there is a state within the state. Now, it's not quite the way the book 7 Days of the Condor or the movie 3 Days would have you think that they're doing, but there's no question at all whether it's the president able to order the killing of an American based on his opinion that person has crossed a line, and you have no way of knowing it, and neither do members of Congress, or it's the kind of accumulation of data where you have no idea what they know and you have no idea what they're doing with it until or unless your freedoms are eliminated. So I think whether you're anywhere in the spectrum, if you value your liberty, you want your government to be much more transparent than it is today, and your representatives to work a lot harder and see a lot more than they do today. And again, that's one of the reasons that we formed the Open Gov Foundation. It's the reason that I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Stick around for a moment, if you will. I just want to. I wanted to take.
Is this a non-panel continued?
This is a non-panel continued. This is moderator's prerogative here, because I wanted to ask you a question about this. We were talking before, and you were arguing that one of the great things about open government is that the left and the right potentially can get together on this.
It's the center we worry about.
Right. It's the center that we worry about. But we sort of look at this and we essentially say, if the left doesn't trust government because we think it's in the pocket of big business, if the right often doesn't trust government because we think it's getting in the way of business.
Or because it's government, period.
Right, sure. So this becomes a place where we can both sort of go after an issue where there's an issue of public trust. And you've gone head on. We really appreciate you speaking bluntly about this question of whistleblowing and the idea that this might come into play if there's no government trust. But at the end of the day, what you're basically saying is, tell me more as your representative, trust me, and I can represent you better.
No, don't trust me.
Okay.
Trust that out of 435 House members, 440 including the delegates, and 100 senators, plus all the other people in government, but just looking at 540 individuals, you got to find somebody that you know is extremely on your side on a particular issue, and you should be able to go to that person. I don't think you should be cubbyholed into who somebody else chooses for you. I may not be sympathetic to something that my old friend Dennis Kucinich has left Congress, but he's well known for being a total peace advocate. Be honest, in some cases, Dennis would be a better choice for information. But if you've got something to say about what's going on wrong, public or private, you should be able to go to a member of Congress and they should be able to pursue it. And today, the NSA example, they can't.
Yeah.
Now, people will tell you, well, Congress was briefed. The Congress was briefed is a shorthand for the members of the Select Intelligence Committee may have had a hearing behind closed doors in which they may have talked about this, and they may have asked 20 questions, and they may or may not have been told the 21st one, which has to do with specifically what Snowden's doing.
Congressman, we really appreciate you being here. We're going to bring you back on for an open Q&A at the end of this.
Which is another non-panel event.
It's another non-panel event. Thank you for not fighting the format. We appreciate all of that. Thank you, sir. So, continuing our theme of insiders and outsiders, we're bringing in another legislator, in this case, Icelandic parliamentarian Birgitta Jonsdottir. It's hard to introduce Birgitta and actually cover all the different facets of her identity. She's a poet and a writer and an activist. She chairs IMMI, which started as the Icelandic Media Initiative, but is now the International Modern Media Institute, if I've gotten it right, which is trying to reform media laws all over the world to make it safer for whistleblowing. Long association with WikiLeaks and the Collateral Murder video. Really thrilled to have Birgitta with us today. If you'll please join us.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here. I always tend to be in the States when something big is happening. I've only been here 3 times after I did the Collateral Murder video. I helped co-produce it in April 2010. I chose, or I was actually advised not to come to the United States by the Icelandic State Department and my lawyers here in the United States, because apparently I am under some sort of NSA investigation without it being called an investigation. So I received a letter from Twitter in 2011, in January, a letter showing me that they had managed to take a secret letter from your government to court and unseal it. And it was basically requesting to get all my metadata, even if I was at the time a member of the Icelandic Parliament. So I have known about all these revelations that have been coming out in the last few weeks about how far the NSA is willing to go to probe into all our privacy. And the only reason I decided to take my Twitter case to court was to try to awaken the general public to how the situation is when it comes to our privacy. And the online privacy seems to be something different than our regular privacy, which I don't see any difference between, because I've been sort of a resident of the internet since 1995, and I have all my most sacred personal stuff there. So if the FBI would actually come to my physical home, they wouldn't find half of what they find in a digital format. So I've been very passionate for a long time to try to improve legislation in accordance to the 21st century. Because most legislators, maybe with a very few exceptions, understand the reality that most of you are very understandable about. So that is one of the reasons I decided to use the Icelandic crisis to attempt to go inside. I had, in the wake of the crisis in Iceland, I don't know if you've heard of it. How many of you heard about the Icelandic financial crisis? Right. So it was sort of like the world's 3rd largest financial collapse. And we were very fortunate that it was so big, because it was also a wake-up call about that everything we had put our trust in had failed us. And now you here in the United States have the same opportunity in relation to the NSA revelations, because it should be an incredible wake-up call for positive legal change. But just make sure that when the dust starts to settle, that you have ready-made, and I know that many of the people that are here have been looking into legalities and laws, and make sure that you have a really good Patriot package, or a Patriot Act, which is actually to give you your rights back, which you have lost during a crisis a few years ago. So how is it to be inside the system? And why in the world did a pragmatic anarchist decide to go inside the system that the anarchists are usually known for wanting to have nothing to do with? Well, since I added the word pragmatic to the way I define myself as a poetician, I understand that many people just don't want to bother. They just expect somebody else to do their democratic duties and hand over their power like it's not the value, or as if it's nothing. And they don't even show up voting, many of them. So I understand this and I appreciate it, but at the same time I think it is very important that once people wake up to something like we've been having in the last few weeks, they have the legal, democratic and constitutional tools to apply their power. So I think it is very important at times of crisis like we have so regularly in our modern world, that we do have in place the democratic tools for people to apply their power. So one of the beautiful things about being an activist inside Parliament, having been outside knocking on the doors for all these years, trying to get a meeting with the parliamentarian or a minister, now I can actually just corner the ministers off in the cafeteria, and there is no way escaping me. That's a lot harder when you're on the outside. And I have, even if I manage to, like I have now this reputation of creating fringe, weird parties and getting them into the parliament. I've managed to create 2 in the last 4 years. My first political movement was about democratic reform and constitutional changes primarily, and transparency. And then it was sort of a hit and run. We had a checklist, and if we couldn't fulfill the checklist or if we finished it, we had to dissolve. And it was horizontal, so there are no leaders. We're not waiting for the big leader on the white horse to come and rescue us. Because anyway, political parties are sort of like Church of Scientology. They're like cults. And I mean, I dare you to look at it and compare it. Look at political parties and how easy it is to get out of them, and what sort of damnation you get if, you know, one of the high priests decides to leave and join another church. Oh my God. I'm not very much for that, and I think it's old school politics. I'm very much trying to look into ways to create new systems, because I've been following what's happening all over the world. Iceland was sort of the first country in this wave of understanding, hey, our system is completely fucked up. And I have to remember not to say this word all the time when I do speeches. We know that our systems are not working for us. You know, it's been echoing everywhere. We understood in Iceland that the academia, the media, the politicians, the regulatory system, it was all failing us. And when we were asking it to work for us, it just rose up like a lion defending itself. And anybody that's ever had to deal with failures in the system and that they're sort of falling in between the holes that are getting increasingly bigger, realize that it's a task that is nearly impossible to win or achieve. So we all know this, and people have been, there's been a sweeping all over the world with this understanding. You know, now we have huge demonstrations in Brazil and in Turkey, where people are echoing the same thing over and over all over the world. We want a system that works for us. And we want the politicians not to be some sort of political elite with professional politicians representing whom? Certainly not the majority of the people. So, okay, we know what's wrong, but I haven't met anybody yet, and I've been all over the world, that knows where the hell we're going in the next 100 years. Where do we want to go? What sort of systems do we want in place? So I see it as, since I recognize this, I see it as one of my tasks inside to start to develop the system with the people that are on the outside. I am just a plug-in. I'm the Freedom of Information Act for the general public inside the system. And my role when I went in there was to actually pull away the curtains so people could see inside. Because when you have, like, the establishment really likes to appear to be mysterious and very complex. Oh, this is so complex that we can't really explain it to you. And I really liked hearing from Mr. Issa talking about the ideas about how to make the legislative process more transparent here in the United States. I am certainly working on it in Iceland. And the trick is to find out, like most people think that or at least in Europe, that the parliaments have the legislative power, but at the same time everybody jokes and says we are the stamping machines for the ministers. And so if we recognize that we need to know exactly where the laws are being written and who writes what, because the lobbyists usually write it in the within a very selected groups within the ministries. How many of you have seen the British comedy Yes Minister? Okay, so everybody that hasn't seen it really needs to see it if you want to understand how our legislative bodies really work. So I think it is so important that we recognize the importance of transparency, and that just like Bradley Manning said, that one of the reasons why he made this information available to the general public of the world was because he recognized that uninformed people can't take enlightened, informed decisions. And so if we want to be really engaged in our societies, we have to have the facts. And if the facts are deliberately hidden from us and our legislation is made so complex that nobody understands it except maybe a handful of people, and usually the gray zones, how to stretch it and manipulate it, are written by the people that are going to abuse it, we're not going to see any changes. So I've been primarily focusing on a set of laws that I managed to pass through the parliament by some sort of, I still don't understand what happened because it was just so easy. So I came from a parliamentary group of 3, and we're 63 in the parliament. And I suggested in a set of laws that I worked with people from WikiLeaks and people from the EU Parliament and all over the world, which is basically a set of law which has been nicknamed IMI, but it's all about sort of legalizing freedom of information. And the idea behind it was to go on a scouting mission all over the world to cherry-pick the best functioning laws in relation to freedom of information, expression, and speech in the 21st century. And obviously, WikiLeaks was a very good choice because at the time in 2009 and 10, they had managed to keep up the stuff no matter what by using different sets of laws in different countries by placing their servers in different sets of countries. So we decided, why don't we just pull all these laws into one place? And for me, it is sort of like the future of lawmaking. So instead of one Icelandic person in Iceland with a few advisors making laws, why not crowdsource it globally if we're dealing with global issues? So I want to raise a challenge here because we are now facing with something so big in relation to our privacy. So I want to raise a challenge. Why don't we do the same thing with our online privacy? I would love to see a global group crowdsource ways so that we can actually have real privacy online, so that our online data is just as sacred as our offline data, which is us. And it is impossible to make that sort of legal shield unless we crowdsource all the best people from around the world that know how the laws function in the international complex, very complex, so that you don't understand settings. Because what I heard when I was doing the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative, that many of the laws could not be passed because, and that was the lawyers in the ministries talking to me, we are all subject to international law and it's so complicated. But then when we analyzed it, it wasn't. So I managed to get it through the parliament, changing 10 different laws in 4 different ministries with a unanimous vote. They're still working on the laws, but as a result, we have the best source protection in the world based on the Belgium source protection, and we have a really good Freedom of Information Act. Our biggest challenge now is to write the proper whistleblowing laws. We were basing them on the US whistleblowing laws, so I mean, we sort of had to toss it away. Unfortunately, I am very sad about the development here. And I really hope that the many bright people that I have met from this country manage to pull themselves together and focus on what is the one thing we need to change so that we can actually legalize not only weed, but freedom of information. So I don't know how long I've talked. Have I passed my time?
You're absolutely perfect. I think that's do you want to offer a summing thought?
Yes,
Or
yes.
please do.
Okay, because I don't have any sense of time. So I just, since I have such an incredible group here with me today, I would just like to encourage you to go inside. You don't have to be there very long. It's a service for a few years. I created an Icelandic pirate party. I encourage you to look into what the pirate parties are all about. It's mostly about the stuff that you care. It is the political arm of the information revolution online or the political arm of the internet. And finally, I want to encourage you to support and make yourself aware of all the people that are the political prisoners of the information revolution. And just to name a few, Barrett Brown, Jeremy Hammond, Bradley Manning, and possibly Snowden. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I'm not going to let you go either.
Oh.
Stick around.
All right.
I want to ask a question. This is we're trying a format, whether we complain about this being sort of like a panel or not. This is my chance to get in the question that I want to get in. First, let me just say thank you so much for the challenge, particularly around these questions of privacy. And I think looking at something like IMMI, which has tried very, very hard to create model legislation for source protection and such, is really interesting around privacy. But I want to ask sort of a deeper question, which is, I was quite surprised. We put you and Congressman Issa on stage together, sort of expecting some sparks and some disagreement. And what I actually got was from both of you this sense that you may need very ethical, very committed people to go into government to act as that source of transparency. And I want to ask you a question, which is a real question for me as an American, which is, Iceland had this incredible upheaval and turmoil, and how did you get confidence in government back? Because you may know we're at a point where congressional approval in this country is very, very low. A lot of people feel very divorced from these systems. One of the questions we're always asking in this room is, how do we get people engaged and to care about civics? How did Iceland do it?
Well, to be perfectly honest, there is only 10% in the parliament, 10% trust in the parliament. There is, however, a true awakening among the general public that they need to be engaged. And I guess that's how politicians need to reclaim their trust, is to make themselves more available to the scrutiny of the general public and to get more guidance. And that has been the rhetoric of me, and probably one of the reasons why I got back in. We just had elections in April. But I think people will not trust government again, not the way it is. We're in these transformational times, and I am actually working with people, and would be very interested to see if Issa has any feedback on it in the panel. I really think that we need to create an entirely new system where the people in the power can be much more controlled by the general public through all the technology we have today. And we're actually creating a model for that currently in Iceland called liquid feedback. So.
Fantastic. I'm hoping we'll bring it out more when we bring you back on stage and have a conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. I think we're going to move from a pragmatic anarchist to, I'm going to say, an idealistic pragmatist. I'm really happy to welcome friend and colleague Sue Gardner to the stage. Sue has a wonderful history of someone who's made incredibly high-quality media all throughout her career as a producer for CBC Radio, going on to run digital for CBC, came in and has really transformed the Wikimedia Foundation, helping that organization become the absolute juggernaut that it is today, and an organization that I know that I, as someone who builds civic media products, really looks up to and admires, but also someone who is now taking a step towards her next challenges. She's announced that she's leaving the foundation, that she's looking for ways to get more involved in the sort of political and societal transformation that we've been talking about here on stage. I'm just thrilled that she can be with us today. Sue Gardner.
Can you help me move the thing forward?
Yep.
Hi.
Thank you so much. I am a former radio producer, which means I'm obsessive about audio, so I need to know, I heard Birgitta great and Darrell, Issa. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you raise your hands in the back if you can hear me? Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So as Ethan said, I used to be a journalist, and I've been running the Wikimedia Foundation since 2007. And so unlike a lot of the people in this room, I'm not an academic, I'm not a public policy expert at all, and so I'm not here to bring statistics or theories or anything like that. I run a big website, and so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell you some stories. So if we're in a fight for a free and open internet, I am a soldier in the trenches, and I'm going to tell you some war stories. That's what I'm going to do. So Wikipedia is pretty much, I think, the consummate insider-outsider. So it's the number 5 most popular website in the world. It gets 500 million readers coming to it every month, and yet it's written by completely ordinary people, right? People with no special privileges, no special access to anything. If the people who write Wikipedia have credentials, they park them at the door. So I will pause to ask you, do people in this room, can you raise your hand if you edit Wikipedia, if you have ever edited it? Thank you so much. Thank you. So Wikipedia obviously is a tremendous success story. It was started in 2001. Nobody expected it was going to turn into what it did turn into. In about 2005, 2006, it started surpassing in popularity all conventional information and news sites. So CNN, the New York Times, the BBC, et cetera. It became more popular than all of those. And today, it's a behemoth, and so part of my job is to swan around a little bit to conferences like this one, where people frequently say things similar to what Ethan just said. They tell me that they look to Wikipedia as a model for civic engagement, a model for participation, a model for what we wanted the internet to be, and as an exemplification of everything that is great and awesome about the internet. And that is great, but there is one problem with that, and it's a serious problem, and the problem is that Wikipedia is pretty much alone, right? It is not the general rule. It is the exception that proves the rule. And that's the point of my talk here today. So Wikipedia is a nonprofit, and what that means is that in Silicon Valley, people often are kind of befuddled and surprised by that, and so they will say to me, you know, why did Jimmy Wales make it a nonprofit? Does he ever regret leaving all that money on the table? Jimmy's answer, by the way, is no. People often ask me why we don't just put advertisements on Wikipedia. People ask me that as though they were the first person to ever think of it. And they ask me if by virtue of the fact that we're a nonprofit, we're against advertising, we're against the private sector, we're against capitalism. Our answer to that, by the way, is also no. Our view is that the internet should have a shape like the rest of the world, right? The internet should have multiple forms of engagement, multiple forms of entities and organizations. A city has restaurants, it has shops, and it has banks, but it also has parks and libraries and schools. We think of Wikipedia as like a park. It's a public space where people can come together. It's meant to be accessible to everybody and used by everybody. And so my question is, where are the other parks? Wikipedia is the only donor-supported site in the top 50. There are only 2 nonprofits in the global top 25, us and Mozilla. And Mozilla, of course, makes a lot of its money from a deal with Google. It doesn't make its money from donations. And we know that the average person spends practically all their time online on the sites of for-profit companies, most of which are located in the United States and most of which are in English. The one exception to that, obviously, is mainland China, which kind of has a wall around it. But for everybody else, they're consuming English language for-profit media on the internet. This worries me. I think that the internet is evolving into a private sector space that has its primary accountabilities to shareholders rather than to citizens. It's trying to sell you stuff. It's doing whatever it wants with your personal data. And even when it begins to be regulated or when it starts to regulate itself, it often does that, or that happens, in a clumsy and a harmful way that hurts its ability to function for the benefit of the public. So my first war story, this happened soon after I joined the Wikimedia Foundation. I joined in 2007. In 2009, Wikipedia faced censorship in the United Kingdom. Does anyone know the Virgin Killer story? Okay, so I am going to tell you some stories that you probably don't know. You know it. So the internet industry wants to remain unregulated, and so it's doing a lot of what ordinarily happens in those situations when you try to self-regulate to stave off regulation by government. And so in the UK, there's a collection of ISPs that have formed something called the Internet Watch Foundation, which is essentially a group of retired police officers, and their job is to keep the internet in the UK free of child pornography. They used to have some hate speech responsibilities too, but I think now it's just child porn. So they're paid by the ISPs to investigate complaints. And in 2009, they got a complaint about Wikipedia about an image of an album cover from 1979. The album was called Virgin Killer. It was by a German heavy metal band called the Scorpions, who I used to listen to in high school. The album cover is a picture of a young girl. She's nude, and she is posed. It's shot as though she's posed behind a glass wall that has been shattered, probably by a bullet, and so the glass is kind of breaking over her. So it's a provocative, slightly violent-seeming image. It's not in good taste. It's a heavy metal band album cover. The Internet Watch Foundation decided that this was child porn, and so they tried to block it from the view of the UK internet users. Again, this is an opt-in ISP thing. And in the blocking of it, they made a clumsy sort of technical move, and what they did while blocking the image, they accidentally made it impossible for anybody in the United Kingdom to edit Wikipedia. And so there was a huge media outcry. Wikipedia editors all over the UK were up in arms. They were furious, and they were talking to the press. And so for 4 or 5 days, this was in the media every day, not just in the United Kingdom, but also internationally. People went crazy. And after a few days, the Internet Watch Foundation backed down. And there were two interesting things about what happened. When the Internet Watch Foundation reversed their decision, they explicitly, publicly, they surprised me by saying that they still believed that the image was child porn, but that the public outcry was too much for them and had forced them to back down. So they backed down because they couldn't win a PR war against fans of the #5 website in the world. And it wasn't the Wikimedia Foundation. We have a PR guy, but we were not doing a lot of outreach, deliberate outreach. The media, it was Wikipedians themselves. It was Wikipedia editors and Wikipedia readers talking to the press about how angry they were. That was the power of being the #5 most popular website. If the album had been hosted on, I don't know, like Joe's Album Art History Wiki in the UK, they would not have had that kind of power. They would have been censored. So Wikipedia, again, an exception. The other thing that I found interesting was that, importantly and invisibly, while this story was playing out, Amazon.com also had this image on their site, and they sold this album on Amazon. While this was playing out, Amazon silently and invisibly took down that Virgin Killer album off their website. So they still sold a version of the album that had a different cover, but they no longer sold the version with the image that was being challenged, that was controversial. They did not call us to ask what was going on. They did not offer us any help. They didn't even silently stand by and watch. What they did was they pulled the album off their shelves, not just in the UK, but worldwide. So I love Amazon, right? I spend a lot of my disposable income on Amazon, thousands of dollars every year. They are fantastic. I am grateful that they have made my life easier, and they've given me choices that I didn't have before. But Amazon's job is not to protect the public interest. Amazon's job is to advance the interests of Amazon, and so that is what they did. I'll tell you another story. In 2001, there was a Wikipedia conference in Mumbai. Jimmy Wales spoke there. Our board member from India, Bashaka Datta, spoke there, and some of the Wikimedia Foundation staff went and spoke as well. We were considerably surprised in Mumbai when the second most popular political party in the country protested outside of our conference, calling for our staff and board members to be arrested. They were mad at us because Wikipedia shows on the site a version of the map of India that shows the disputed borders with China and Pakistan as per the United Nations. So it shows multiple borders, right? Inside India, that is not legal. Inside India, you're only allowed to show the map of India that shows the official borders as per the Indian government. This protest, as you can imagine, made us at the Wikimedia Foundation exceedingly anxious. So we hired a bunch of lawyers, including lawyers on the ground in India. We spent weeks researching the legal and the PR issues, trying to figure out what was going on, how volatile was the situation. We were particularly anxious because the head of eBay India had been put in jail in Delhi for 4 or 5 days back in, I think, 2006. And so we knew that it was possible our folks actually could go to jail. And so where we could, we took a variety of small, non-controversial steps to try to protect ourselves in the event that something really bad happened. Ultimately, we got lucky and the issue seemed to fizzle out. What we did not do was we did not change the map of India that's displayed on Wikipedia. And partly that's because we can't. I run the Wikimedia Foundation. I'm not running the Wikipedia editors. They make their own decisions. But also it's because we shouldn't. There's no reason not to publish the UN map of India. Now, having said that, what was interesting here as we researched our position was that we seem to be the only people who take that stance. So if you're inside India, Google Maps shows you the official map of India with the borders as defined by the Indian government. When The Economist magazine prints a special edition on India, my lawyer was telling me, they will publish a different map of India inside India relative to the map of India that they publish in the magazine outside of India. So we're the only people doing what we do. I think it's important to note that not everybody has the legal resources that the Wikimedia Foundation has, right? Not everyone is as popular as the Wikimedia Foundation. We do have a PR team, right? So public or private, other organizations, small or large, may not be able to fight as we do. And of those who do get to fight, most of them are going to be private sector. They're going to be for-profit companies. A lot of those players, like I was saying before, a lot of those players are doing great things, but on the whole, over time, they're going to put profits before public service because that's their job. So where do you look for help? I don't think that governments are helping much. Mostly, I think governments are still kind of befuddled, right? That's what we saw with SOPA. They're creating legislation that actually does not help. Even if they knew what to do, though, I am not convinced, and I don't think we should be convinced that they would do it. Too often, as we know, they're corporate captives. We saw that with SOPA too. So today, the governments listen too much to the entertainment industry. They listen too much to the copyright owners, folks who have been in Washington doing lobbying for a long, long, long time. In the future, they may listen too much to the giant technology companies, all of whom are building armies of lawyers in DC as we speak. Either way, the voices of ordinary people are not going to get heard. They do not get heard. They're only very rarely heard. They were heard in SOPA, but that was an exception. I have difficulty believing that more or better civic engagement is going to fix that anytime soon. I agree with Larry Lessig, right? I think it's structural problems. It's fundraising. It's gerrymandering. I think that's made for an incumbency that has really skewed incentives. So, as a soldier in the trenches, my message to this conference is one of caution and concern. I think that aside from Wikipedia, there isn't any large popular space being carved out for the public good on the internet. There are a whole bunch of tiny experiments, and some of them are great and awesome and super interesting and really innovative. And it is true that small initiatives can accomplish amazing, large, outsized things on the internet. But I think we want to be honest with ourselves. We are not gaining ground, right? Our schools, our libraries, and our parks on the internet are really small. We don't have the information sharing participatory Garden of Eden that we wanted and that we used to talk about, right? We are not lost, but I think that we are losing. And I say this because I think that it's easy to come together for a conference like this and to get really excited by the good things that are happening, right? And we do want to keep our morale up. We do want to, be excited and do a good job and share information and all of that. But I think that if you have read, so everybody is recommending from the stage today, so you were recommended, I think, a movie and a book or maybe 2 movies. I will recommend to you a couple books. Tim Wu's The Master Switch, have you read it? If you haven't read it, you must read it. Also, Robert McChesney, Digital Disconnect, which is reasonably new. I think it came out a couple months ago. I'm reading it right now. It's fantastic. So if you've read those books, if you've read things like that, you know that the insiders are winning. The insiders are not losing, right? They will not lose unless things change. And so I think that the internet needs serious help if it's going to stay free and open, if it's going to be a powerful contributor to the public good. That's what I'm hoping you'll discuss over the course of this conference. I'm hoping you will talk about how to create an ecosystem of parks and libraries and schools online that supports participation, dialogue, and sharing. Thank you.
So before you sit down, or sit down if you'd like.
I will sit down.
You sit down and I'll sit down too. And Darrell and Birgitta, if you'll join us up here, we'd really appreciate that. While you come up, let me ask you this question. I find this idea of public spaces, of parks, of schools, of libraries on the internet to be a really rich and thoughtful concept in all of this. But I would love to get sort of more of a sense for what are those spaces, what do they look like, what else do we need? We've got a great encyclopedia. Wikimedia's tried a couple of other projects in this space. Surely you've done a lot of other thinking about where you want to go around this. What are the other sorts of public spaces that we need?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are lots of really interesting things happening, but I feel like they are not getting the traction that they should be, right? So I look at things, even things like the Khan Academy, right? Super interesting. I think that there are all sorts of small projects that deserve to be doing better, that should be doing better. I just feel like the overall weighting of the ecosystem is kind of wrong, right? When you think about where people are spending their time and what they're doing on the internet, it is not a framework that supports what we had originally imagined. When I read Tim Wu's Master Switch, I found it fascinating because he talks about how at the sort of dawn of every disruptive communications technology, so back when radio was introduced, back when television was introduced, we thought that they were going to be all about ordinary people sharing all the time. That's what we thought everything was going to be, right? And then it turns into cable television. I watched CNN this morning. I was appalled. I was watching CNN. I'm just like, oh my God. So it was terrible. So I feel like Wikipedia is an example of the kind of internet that we want to have, but I feel like everything should be more like Wikipedia. There should just be a lot more of that, a lot more sharing, a lot more information getting out to people, a lot less commercial space. I just feel like the balance of the ecosystem is off.
Darrell, as someone who is passionate about the internet, but is also very passionate about free enterprise, can I get you to engage with this idea of sort of public spaces, the notion that there are spaces online that we want to have public support, whether it's parks, whether it's schools, whether it's libraries, whether it's something like a Wikipedia? How does that fit in with what also has been an enormously sort of rich and generative space, as well as a space in which really interesting people and innovative companies have built a great deal of wealth as well as a great deal of innovation?
Well, you know, Sue, I'm not trying to be the contrarian, but let me do what I do well. It's a free market. Costs you about $2 a month to have a website. If nobody wants it, whose fault is it? Ultimately, you mentioned the dawn of the radio industry, the dawn of television. I came out of the consumer electronics industry. I was chairman of the association. You know, look, TV became what people wanted to pay for. You know, they paid for I Love Lucy by watching endless soap commercials. It costs nothing to put up a website for all practical purposes. It costs nothing to go to it incrementally if you already have access. Wikipedia is a great success because it provides a great service. Google doesn't like Wikipedia and make it the number 1 or 2 thing to come up when you put anything in. The viewers do. One of the questions that politicians always have to come to grip with is, why are people not voting for me? Well, it's not because they're doing something wrong. You know, the truth is that you get the votes you earn at best. So I guess for you, I'd say, here's the beauty of the internet. It is all public parks. It's all virtually free. Now the question is, how do we drive more success stories? How can you leverage something like the success of Wikipedia to branch off the brand into equally good things that get noticed, and then maybe because they get noticed, they do better. But you know, my view is the next X will be a success, non-commercial, if people want to go to it, and if you can find a way to finance the relatively de minimis cost of being on the internet.
See, I wish that were true, right? And I'm very conscious of people using Wikipedia as an example of something that proves that that's possible, right? And I think it was possible in 2001. It was an open space. Anything could happen. It was early days, land grabs, etc. And Wikipedia was there in the beginning when that was feasible. I don't think it's as feasible today as it used to be. I live in the Bay Area, and I spend a lot of time, obviously, with engineers and with people who are starting companies and so forth. And I used to wonder what the problem was, because I thought, you know, there's a lot of, like, software is eating everything, technology is everything, and there are a lot of really brilliant, obviously, and mission-driven engineers. And so I used to think, why aren't we getting more stuff getting created that is purpose-built to serve the public? And I think it's the incentives. When you look around the Bay Area and you look at how the system works, I think, so when you go out to Silicon Valley, people talk a lot about...
So your argument is nobody's building the software, nobody's picking sites, nobody's investing in offering content. Your argument is not that nobody's going to the sites.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that if you are an engineer in Silicon Valley and you've got a great idea for something that you want to build, what are the mechanisms for you to build that, right? Typically, you're going to need to get some investment. Where are you going to get your investment? You're going to go to folks like Y Combinator and so forth. There's a whole system there designed to help you build your company, and it's actually awesome, and they're incredibly self-aware about it. They're really, really good at it. There's all kinds of hatcheries and things like that. But they all channel you in one direction, right? You're going to get funding from venture capitalists or from angel investors, and then you're going to be on a path where you're either going to make $1 billion, and people talk all the time about their IPO and this, that, and the other thing, or you're going to get acquired by a larger engineering organization. You're going to get acquired by Google or Facebook or somebody like that, right? That doesn't leave a lot of space for other ways of supporting yourselves. I know that there have been, there's a variety of initiatives, you know, the B Corp and things like that, but really the dominant culture in the Bay Area, which is where most innovation happens, channels you into...
As a Blackhawks fan, it would be a very good idea not to mention that in this venue later this evening.
Can I just add to
please,
this? Because one thing that is forgotten in this debate is the fact where do people go, and why is everybody going to Facebook, even if we don't even own our own content? You know, if I want to move house, I can't take my stuff with me, so I just have to move myself. But I can't really. I've tried to move away from Facebook because I don't really like it. And it's very difficult if I want to move into the more alternative activist spaces. So you have to rebuild everything. And also, like for ordinary people who use Facebook, like to give, like they do these flower games and whatever, like, I don't know, like I get endless bubble safari or whatever. I never go there, but it's addiction-based. It's just like Facebook is sort of like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, where there are people that specialize in getting people hooked. And on the flip side, if you use Facebook as an activist, like we've done in Iceland, we wouldn't have had all our different actions if we wouldn't, like 98% of Icelanders are on Facebook. So we use that to mobilize people as well, but it's a very bad mobilization tool because it's, well, everybody's read the findings from NSA. But so it's not really about, I think that you're simplifying it a lot, the way you put it up.
That's because I heard earlier that people say things are complex in government, and it's a sham for not wanting you to know the truth.
No, now you are doing the typical political game. You're getting too lost in the political game.
You put two politicians up here, this could happen.
I'm not a politician, by the way. I'm a poetician. No, I think it is important that, you know, even if we would try to carve out, like I remember those times in, like, when we were starting on the internet in 1995, when it sort of became visual and lots of people started to get on it, that this was like we had a chance to create a whole new world, a brand new world. Mm-hmm. And now it's being industrialized with exactly the same tools that are, you know, destroying our societies.
So I'm interested that IMMI is going after creating sort of ideal legislation around online speech, but isn't necessarily building these sorts of public spaces in the way that sort of Wikimedia has come and built a public space that runs under very different rules. Would that be a good idea? Is that something that IMMI or others are thinking about doing? Is there a need for a Facebook that's a public park rather than a Facebook that's about addiction to games about flowers.
Absolutely, and I really love the way Sue was describing the spaces in our sort of cyberspace as public parks and so forth, because that's the way it started, and it's sort of like watching the rainforests die. So it is. We still have an opportunity, but I agree we're sort of running out of time, just as we're running out of time with stuff on our planet. IMI's intention is to make sure that Wikipedia could not be censored. So the intention between the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative was also always about, like, let's say there is a blogger in Tibet that risks his life to blog about the situation there. Our role was to create a haven so that his stuff would remain up no matter what. We can't protect that person, nor can we protect all the whistleblowers in the world. And it's important that people understand that this was never intended for the physical reality, but for the online content.
Let me ask a question.
Please. And then we're going to open this up to the...
Well, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Sue being from, or living in the Bay Area, social responsibility is a big buzzword. Lots of words like that. How many people out here know software engineers that you would say were socially conscious or socially responsible? Just how many of them donate 4 hours a week, just 10% over and above their for-profit, to doing socially responsible programming?
Lots of them.
Fraction. There's the real answer, is to your question, and I'm throwing it out as a straw man, but you could come to government and you'd end up like public broadcasting, endlessly making me watch a commercial, telling me it's not a commercial. Well, it generates huge amounts of money from that, produces good stuff, but still comes to the government trough for $500 million a year. Or you can ask the question of, can you maintain your independence and go out and say, on the left, the right, the middle, will you be socially responsible? And if you're making that $1 billion, will you all along the way be part of donating just 4 hours a week? And to be honest, if Zuckerman and others wanted to donate just 1 hour a week of their software people to say, go online, do some socially responsible thing for 1 hour a week, how many programmers would be there? So I think we can get there, but I think we get there the same way we got to public parks originally. Public parks were set aside at the time, but nothing was there until the community built it, and they typically built it with volunteers at a very local level. Can we get there? Sure. You get just 10%, just 1% of people's time doing it, and you'd have huge innovation in those parks.
I recommend you go after Zuckerberg rather than Zuckerman. He's got a
Zuckerberg.
lot more developers than I do. I've got about 8, and while they're fantastic, you don't actually want 1% of their time.
The problem is
who's got
Zuckerman is a donor. It's a whole different group.
No, it's much more confusing. Questions, please. We're going to try the moderating from the floor trick here. It allows me to try to control by controlling the microphone.
Actually,
see how that goes.
CEO.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Susan McGregor. I'm from Columbia Journalism School. And I wanted to address the point that you brought up, which is about access, right? Because actually in the United States, there's pretty terrible internet access in most places. So I think the question of, people will go there, if you build it, they will come, I think really belies the reality, which is that we don't have high-speed internet access in vast numbers of communities in the United States. I mean, even in Western Massachusetts here, there's really no way to get there. I'm sure you're familiar with someone like Susan Crawford's work on this issue. So I think it's sort of a false argument to say that, if people really wanted it, that's where they would go. A lot of people can't get there. So what about the issue of, you can donate, time. Most of our great infrastructure, I'm from New York City originally, right? A lot of our parks were donated by the Rockefellers, right? So actually there's a long tradition not of sort of like groundswell innovation. Bette Midler bought most of our parks back in the early 90s and sort of made them public spaces. So it seems to me that there's an opportunity there for government, just like Eisenhower built the roads, to build that broadband access and make it possible for people to actually get to the places that they want to be. Is there not a government role there? Well,
I'll be the contrarian again. Eisenhower built the backbone of the interstates because he saw how Hitler mobilized his tanks at great speed, and he wanted us to have an east-to-west capability of deploying huge resources. And, oh, by the way, he saw it valuable for commerce, as did Al Gore's father, Al Gore. So, but he only built the interstate backbone. We continue to have the vast majority of roads in America built with local funds. Somebody once told me that if you count driveways and private roads, half of America isn't even public. But having said that, in 2001, the standard for the best place for the internet, the gold standard when I came to Congress, was Korea, 256K. High-speed internet will always be too damn slow for people, and they'll always say there isn't enough. If you look at the standard of a decade ago and you ask, has it been rolled out virtually everywhere? The answer is yes, it has. There's a few exceptions in rural America. We'll keep moving the goalposts. Look, if I don't have 20 up and 20 down, I'm not happy because the instant gratification isn't fast enough. The question, I think, isn't can we do more but with government financing? The truth is that the backbone that started the internet, the fiber that was there and the hubs that were there and the choices of where these things located were around defense. So there's been an awful lot of government. The real question is, and I came here to talk about open government. You're not going to get an open, free access if you go to the government for money. You're going to be tied to the very devil. One of the things that's good about 501c3s, about nonprofits of all sorts, is although they get a benefit, they don't have to go to the government for it. You get 44.6% benefit if I give to your foundation. I get 44.6% benefit because I get to write it off on my taxes. I get a huge government subsidy to give to a nonprofit, but you don't have to go to the government to ask for it. So, should it be done? Yes, but I think it should be done with 44.6% funding of the government without the government having a say in what it does. That's the beauty of looking at foundations, including the Rockefeller Foundation and others.
Birgitta, I know you want to get a comment on this question of infrastructure.
Yeah, I think we're in the process of creating a new constitution in Iceland, and one of my favorite things in it is that the internet access is a basic human right. And so we're talking about open governance and so forth, and so if people don't have access to internet, how can they participate in the online community that we're trying to build? And I think it's essential that we address this as highly contradictory. I was just traveling on the West Coast, and I thought, I'm in the United States. Obviously, I will have connectivity, with my mobile phone, and I can get online and so forth. And I was shocked about as soon as you got into semi-rural areas, there is no internet connectivity. And one of the weird things is talking about initiatives. I went to the Internet Archives, which is one of my favorite places in the world, and Brewster, the head librarian of the world, is one of my favorite people. And he told me that he had set up a tower to give Richmond, where the Internet Archives in that area, free internet, and he was told to take it down. I mean, so how does that fit in with, the stuff that you're saying?
You're raising a good point. First of all, dump your AT&T and go with Verizon when you're in the States. That will help because we have various, the truth is we have various levels of rollout. But your point is the best one, which is your government has sold you out by selling off bandwidth. Now, if there's a place where the government has a role, it's exactly that. We gave away the bandwidth to television in return for public service, and then we lost track of public service. We create such a small amount of bandwidth. Most of you are familiar with the 802.11, where you're dealing with your wireless routers, but that's a fraction of the bandwidth that could be made available. Every time we sell a new chunk for cellular, and I'm all for the cellular industry, but every time we sell it instead of making that available for unlicensed use. If we made a fraction of what we made available for cellular for unlicensed use, we all could be walking around quite candidly with a VoIP phone, making free phone calls everywhere, and not even worrying about it. So if you want high-speed internet, Yeah, if you want it wireless, then you've got to ask for unlicensed spectrum to be made available instead of everyone saying, well, I can balance the budget for 1.5 minutes by selling off $1 billion worth of bandwidth. And that's what you keep hearing, is we could get up to $100 billion for selling off all the known bandwidth that they're looking at auctioning off. $100 billion isn't even 1 month of deficit in a good year.
I'll say, as a Western Massachusetts guy in all of this, and I appreciate the reference in the question, it looks like the solution for us ultimately is going to be the combination of government and foundation and unlicensed spectrum. So we've had the Patrick administration actually invest very heavily in getting bandwidth to every library in small towns like the town of 3,000 people that I live in. But then it's a nonprofit called Wired West that's going to be responsible for trying to get bandwidth to the home. And that's almost certainly going to have to deal with putting up huge WiMAX clouds or something along those lines, which would benefit hugely from spectrum. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Let me just throw out a general reminder. Questions are interrogative statements. They end with a question mark. They are often signaled with an upturn in voice. And they are something that all 3 people on stage could respond to in one fashion or another, and we probably have space for about 2 more.
Hi, Joyce Barnes from the International Center for Journalists, and I'd like to hear from the panelists about this issue of national security and privacy. I'm from New York City, and we dealt with terrorism. I'm Boston. I don't need to talk about the terrorist activity here. If you poll people, a lot of people think that in the name of national security, it's not an information free-for-all. There is a safety factor here. So where does the public's opinion come into this discussion? Are you talking about improving a whistleblower law that will also keep us safe? Or are you talking about a complete information free-for-all where everything goes out there, and let the public decide? Because there are those people in the public who feel like, I want to be protected, and I don't have anything to hide.
So I'd love to get answers from all panelists on this. I'm going to put Sue on the spot first. As the non-legislator up there, I would love to hear you sort of address this question of where you think we should be going with these laws around privacy and this balance between privacy and security.
Sure, and I'm obviously in no way an expert, so thank you for letting me go first. I think what I would say is, I was a journalist for a long time, and so I have a bias towards freedom of expression, and I have a bias against secrecy, right, obviously. When I first started seeing the work that WikiLeaks was doing, and I was asked all the time, including by customs and immigration officials, if I ran WikiLeaks. My mother asked me if I ran WikiLeaks. And when I first
but you know someone who does.
Yeah. When I first started getting asked about WikiLeaks and looking at WikiLeaks myself, I had a lot of questions, as we all would have, right? I had a lot of questions about to what extent were they protecting the safety of the people who were doing the leaking, the whistleblowers, and to what extent were they being judicious and careful in terms of what information they released and what information they redacted. And, I've read a lot of different sort of competing narratives, and I don't know what reality is, but that would be where my questions would have lied and did lie. Ultimately, where I come down is I am against secrecy, and I don't think it's a level playing field. And I think that when people express anxiety about being protected, I don't think that they're basing that on objective, neutral information. I'm Canadian, by the way. I'm constantly surprised by the American media. I was surprised by the American media this morning, again, watching CNN, watching the way they talked about Ed Snowden. I was astonished. It was as though he was a tiger escaped from a zoo, right? There was no political speech. There was no analysis of what he was trying to do. It was as though he was rogue. I found the level of discourse on this issue really remarkably low. So I think that, in a better world, you would have an informed population making great decisions based on great information provided by a great media. That is not the world that we are living in, right? So people are basing their views on information that I think is distorted. Now, having said that, I would also say that the last time I came into the airport and was asked if I ran WikiLeaks, and I told the guy that I did not run WikiLeaks, the customs guy, he said, "Oh, that's too bad because they're fucking awesome."
Well, that seems like a great transition to bring it over to Birgitta. who also doesn't run WikiLeaks, but
No, I have never. I, however, discovered when I was volunteering for WikiLeaks, and I did help co-produce the video, and I was a spokesperson for the organization for a very short period of time. Yeah, so I no longer, I don't speak to Julian Assange on a regular basis or anything like that, but I still do, however, support organizations like WikiLeaks while we don't have the laws in place to ensure that we do have a passage for the brown digital envelope when there is information that should go into the public domain. And I was asked a very similar question in Iceland. Like, obviously, I come from Iceland. We don't have a military establishment. We didn't have 9/11, but it, however, did change all the world, not only the United States. So, you know, I can't really tell you exactly how you should run your country. But since there was a very high level of secrecy in Iceland, in particularly in relation to all things governmental and the Foreign Affairs Committee that I had a seat in. So it was very interesting for me as a new parliamentarian. Like, everything, all meetings in the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Parliament used to be secret, every one of them. Now, since we had a change from right to left in Iceland for a short period of time, the chairman of the committee said, okay, we're going to reverse this tradition. We're going to have everything open by default, and if there is a need for secrecy, you can opt out, or there needs to be an explanation why, because we have an understanding that some things need to be kept secret. And so it turned out that 95% of our meetings were open. 95%. So I'm just saying, you can. I feel that there has become like this incredible cult of secrecy. And maybe it is not needed around everything, and actually within the secrets thrives corruption. So it often is just one person's decision to flip it. But I'm not going to tell you what needs to be secret and what not, but I'm concerned about the level of secrecy, but because at the same time, like, when you look at the classification of the secrecy that Bradley Manning leaked, 4 million people had access to it. So you can't really say it is a level of secrecy. The person that's more like Daniel Ellsberg is Snowden, which had a really high clearance. Mm-hmm. But and I think the irony is that he is being charged, they're going to charge him for being a spy, telling all of us, not only the United States, this is information that's relevant to everybody in the world that has any sort of digital interactions or data stored about them. He is a spy for telling us that we're all being spied on by the people that, it's crazy, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
so
and
help us out with this.
Yeah, well, if I were here as a congressman, I would be saying the following. One, no generation, no matter how much they want safety, can leave to their next generation safety at the price of freedom. And that's what our Constitution, which doesn't change much, even with 20-some changes, they're fairly minor compared to the basic principles of liberty. And so the first thing is, yes, we lost people at 9/11. We lost people in Boston at the marathon. We lost people in Oklahoma City in the 90s. But that's partially the price of freedom in an open society. And some of that we have to accept because the alternative of a totalitarian dictatorship like Syria had been, eventually it falls apart and it's usually worse. The second thing is we're a constitutional republic, which means that within that constitutional framework, there's an absolute essential that you have as much transparency so you can decide who represents you, why, and how. And then there's an absolute responsibility that those people who represent you in that republic, your congressmen, your senators, or at the state level similarly, they have to have access to the information so you can have that confidence. So when I bemoan the whistleblower bill, which I helped author, and we got all we could get, and we've been trying to get it for 12 years, it's because making no judgment about the NSA leak per se, not every member of Congress could have received his information without him still being guilty of a violation. We need to make it to where every member, to the greatest extent possible, while maintaining what needs to be secret, can also be your advocate to make sure that behind the scenes they're not trampling on your rights. And again, if I were a member of Congress and a chairman of a committee, and here in that capacity, I would tell you about what I call the black cow eating licorice at midnight. Under subpoena, this administration and the one before it will deliver you these deliver members of Congress all black pieces of paper saying, well, we just redacted. It's like, well, what did you redact underneath there? I'll give you an example. In the IRS case, the IRS redacted the first set of documents recently seen by a committee of Congress. They redacted out the words conservative and Republican as though it was personal information of the taxpayer. Or patriot. I'm going, wait a second here. This isn't personal information. This is a subject of a discovery on abuse. In the case of Benghazi, and I will speak a little more personally here, I sat on the dais with my partner in this case, Elijah Cummings, somewhat supportive at first. And I said, well, what about this document? And the document says unclassified. It's just an email. It's embarrassing because it's all about how they screwed up and let people not be protected in a terribly dangerous place. Completely unclassified. And I'd say, well, do you have that in the book that you won't give to us that you say is classified? Yes. Well, I'm going to put it in the record. And I put 20 or 30 of them in the record. And eventually I put all of them I had in the record. Everyone was unclassified. And yet our government said that the total of these embarrassing emails, all unclassified, all of which were basically denying the kind of security that these people, the ambassador and others, were asking for, they made it classified in total. Now, as long as your government can take information that is completely yours, should be FOIA eligible, and withhold it, either in all or in part, based on some sort of a cumulative basis, you won't have the transparency you need as the public to make decisions, and if they're denied from your House and Senate members, they won't have the transparency. So I'm a big believer that although we could talk about whether the right approach was taken, we can still use this tragedy of release of this NSA information to find out two things. One is, did this administration overstep its bounds, and maybe even the previous administration? And two, how do we get a level of transparency so that every American, if they discover something they think is wrong, will go to somebody where they can have an advocate without having it released to the public if that's not appropriate? That's a level that I think we all have to fight for if we're going to protect our freedoms.
We've got time for one final question. It needs to be a quick question with quick answers, but I don't want to let these folks off the stage without at least one more opportunity for someone to ask a question. Anyone got a hand up? Over here.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. My name is Kate. My mom is a high school teacher, and she's one of the people who teaches kids how to use the internet, right? When she first started teaching, they could use no internet sources, and then 8 years later, used 2, and then they had to use 6 books in addition on their final project. I'm wondering, what's your advice? I get a sense of impending doom, and it seems like the internet is falling apart somewhat from this speech, but there's a great opening up in education of willingness to use information. And what are some tips that you can give people who are just regular internet users about how to be better stewards, how to better choose, and how to vet things for themselves?
All right, my friends, quick thoughts on better stewardship of the internet, starting with Sue, who I know takes this role very seriously.
I do, and I hear stories like that all the time. And yeah, I mean, it used to be that nobody let anybody use, for example, Wikipedia in the classroom, and now they are starting to understand what it is and how it can be used and using it properly, which is great. So I want to maybe correct if I left a little bit of a misimpression. There's no question in my mind that we all have more access to information than ever before. It is easier and better. I think that we obscure sometimes that story because we hear so much about the business model crisis for journalism and the business model crisis for information production, right? So the internet broke the business model, but it made information vastly more available, and it is so much better than it was before. That is why I preach doom, because I remember what it was like before, and I know how great it is today, and I do not want us to lose it, right? And then in terms of advice, my advice to people would be to become contributors, you know? Like, obviously, I want everybody to edit Wikipedia, but I think become participants in the public space on the internet. That's the easiest and best way, I think, for people to understand it better, to navigate it more easily, to apply the right kinds of judgment to it. So I would get your mom to get her kids to edit Wikipedia.
Birgitta, what's the thing we should do to be better stewards of this resource that we've been all creating together?
Well, stop using Google because they make algorithms. Seriously, Google is choosing for you, and I don't think that's very good. There are very many good alternatives to it, but also create communities. You know, I love the internet so much. It is. It's such an integrated part of my life and has been for so long, and it completely opened the world for me, enabled me to work with people from all over the world and to share knowledge and experience and expand and do good things for society. That's why I really want to protect my home. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think, you know, for the kids and the people that are coming up, like the internet children, they don't know any world outside the internet, like without it, and it's a really integrated part. And I want to protect them because I know that nobody is ever gonna go into and reading the user agreements. You know, so by all means, don't have them read the user agreements because it's impossible to keep up with them. Create small communities, you know, in that, you know. And have people do projects that are in the Wiki spirit. You know, I really love the spirit of the Wiki and the how we can contribute to our societies through the democracy or democracy.
So Darrell, aside from stopping using Google and supporting WikiLeaks, what do you want us to do to be better stewards of the internet?
we support. You said and support Wikimedia. I'm sure that's what you said. Well, no, but I think to your mother, education, public education, K through 12, but even college, is stuck in a Luddite past to a great extent. And you mention it, you know, the fact that first they said don't use it. Trust me, in my era, they didn't want us using pocket calculators. It was a slide rule or nothing. But if your mother wants to really embrace, and if teachers and education wants to embrace, the first thing you do is tear down the barrier that makes books, as soon as they're for education, incredibly expensive, recopyrighted with the same crap, just slightly rearranged so they can charge a lot of money for school books. The internet opens up the ability. Your mother can produce 1 to 50 splash pages of things her students can go to that she's looked at and knows are going to send the student to the right kind of ideas and innovation that keeps them focused on the subject matter, but at the same time makes what is available free, enough to teach any course. Any course that's taught in America can be taught online for free today if you pre-screen and find where the material is. And I'm a big supporter of copyright. But there's a lot of copyright abuse, and the textbooks industry is a huge copyright abuser in which there, you know, I mean, you take classical courses, something as simple as English, and you realize the books are always new on copyright and very expensive. It doesn't have to be that way, and you can get better material, more topical material. So that's in addition to using Wikipedia as a not always right, based on somebody whose site is a little selective. Yeah, right. But I'm just a gun-toting arsonist on the site. That's the only thing to remember. But no, I think it's a great opportunity. If your mother or any educator wants to take that next level, move your entire curriculum online to the greatest extent possible, because you can provide information that you could never haul in the way of books.
So we're going to end there in part so I can ask Darrell, Issa some questions about open access because that's wonderful to hear these questions about how we make open educational materials available. I just want to thank everyone for being on stage with me today. Sue Gardner, Birgitta Jonsdottir, Darrell, Issa. We get a round of applause. Appreciate everyone being here. We're going to take a very quick 10-minute break, go use the bathrooms, get a cup of coffee, say hi to these nice people. We're going to come back for the announcements of the News Challenge winners. Thank you, everyone.